So we can start.
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm having some issue with my Wi-Fi. 1 second. Okay, let me share the screen first. Is it visible, please?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay.
Sir, you can announce students
Yes.
that the upcoming lecture will not be there on 22nd.
Yes. Yeah. Good afternoon, students. Uh, See, there was some confusion about the lecture, the next lecture on 22nd March. Apparently, it's a holiday for DAE, so there will not be any lecture on 22nd March. So we'll take the next date. That would be 24th. The next lecture will be on 24th. So we start today's lecture, and just a recap of what we have done. I have told you about publication misconducts, and also I started this author misconduct, authorship issues, who is an author, and things like that. I had okay, fine. Yeah. Today I'll be again continuing on this authorship issues, and then talk to you on complaints and appeals to journals on the issue of acceptance or rejection of manuscripts. Just for a recap, I told you that authorship issues are not uncommon, and they can also threaten scientific integrity. And some of the most common authorship issues which one comes across is that regarding who should be named as author or as a contributor. And the next one would be that whenever there's a list of authors, what should be the order of this list? Who should come first? Who should come second, etc. And then what are the expectations for contributors to a project? That is what it means is that you start a collaboration with some expectation, okay? And the students also work with certain expectations. The principal investigator also works with certain expectations. And very often there is a dispute, or sometimes disputes can arise concerning these expectations from different people. Then there are what are called the intellectual property issues, in case the research could result in some patent or something like that. So who should get the credit and things like that sometimes causes for problems, especially if it involves multiple institutions. Unless, of course, this has been thrashed out well before uh, by all the concerned stakeholders. Then I also told you about why authors lie and when do these authors lie. So I told you about different kinds of authorship. One was a gift authorship. That means you try to include names of people who took little or no part at all in the research activity. Sometimes it's a convention in certain labs that you put the name of the boss in all the papers. Sometimes you also put the name of the boss's boss also. And so these are, even though they have not done anything towards that research activity, not even involved in any aspect of that research, still you find that people include their names as authors. So this is just done to please certain people, and that's why it's called gift authorship. Then there are people who do contribute to the research, sometimes in a big way also, but they will feel that if they include their name in the authorship list, then there could be some other issues which are not known in the foreground. They are sometimes in the background, like certain conflicts of interest, which I talked to you about. So that could prevent the publication of that manuscript. Yes? Okay. So, yeah, so then they feel that if their name is included in the list, then the article may run into trouble. So even though they have a major part in that particular research activity, they will still not come forward and give their names, but they may do all kinds of backseat driving. So that is called a ghost authorship. Then finally, we have this unfair omission of people who really contributed to the activity. And at the end of the process, they find that their names are not included. So that's what is called an orphan authorship. And sometimes people include names of people without even telling them, just because they happen to be some big names or famous names. And you feel that adding their name will help to get the article published or something like that. So it's called a star value author. And these were the various definitions. And also I had told you about what could be the possible solutions for each of these uh, different kinds of detrimental authorship practices. And then it's always the case of who gets the credit. So, as I said, the levels of expectations on part of the contributors regarding authorship, acknowledgement, etc., they exist, and they can vary also between countries and disciplines, chemistry or life sciences, etc. So, the best thing to do in this situation is always discuss these authorship issues at the start of any particular research activity. That will help a lot in at least laying down a base for the authorship and authorship list. And it also clarifies their individual roles and what should be the individual responsibilities. So if that could be done, it will definitely minimize acrimony between people and also increase the motivation among the younger people. And so what do you thrash out in such a meeting, authorship issue meeting? So one needs to know who should be the authors and then who should be acknowledged as contributors. So acknowledgement is something at the end of the paper which you attribute to certain people who have helped in some way to the research work but not contributed to it. So they are acknowledged as contributors. Then the vital question about who should be the first author and who should be the corresponding author. And then what is the order of the authorship? And then again, the responsibilities and expectations of each contributor to the research activity. And again, I talked about the intellectual property, etc., and confidentiality issues. So it's better to trash it out before the start of the activity. And then finally, who is the person among this group of workers, research workers, who decides where the manuscript finally should be sent and when it should be sent? So that means basically the corresponding author. So, as I said, the roles and contribution to research activity could keep changing during the course of the work, because the very nature of research activity, you work with the unknown, the expected results may not come up the way you have planned out, etc. And sometimes you find that a person who has been working very actively may suddenly decide to back off because either he finds that his expertise is not working out or for some other reason, etc. So these roles can keep changing. Okay. I mean, I'm talking about the roles between the different authors who have decided. And because the nature of the work, and this can keep changing. And sometimes these changes could be quite significant also. And sometimes you may even have someone dropping out of the whole activity also. So one thing I told you last time was that enough care must be taken to protect research students, because the research students, they are not like a permanent faculty, etc., and they are there for a limited period of time, maybe 5 years to 6 years. And in this time, they have to finish their work and get the degree. So they have what is called a disadvantaged power position in the whole structure. And it is true that many people take advantage of students in many places, and hence they are very vulnerable to exploitation. So there must be special care taken to protect research students uh, from from all these unnecessary uh, issues. Okay, now I guess this is the point where we stop. So whenever you have problems with authorships, there are two possibilities. I told you what constitutes an author. What are the four criteria laid down by this ICMJE guidelines, which determine who could be an author? So the first disagreement basically arises from that group where all the people actually they satisfy these ICMJ guidelines, authorship guidelines, but still they have some problems among themselves. So these are what are called authorship disputes. And then there's a second type where all the guidelines laid down by ICMJ and such bodies are violated. And so what it means is that they don't satisfy the criteria, the four criteria which I talked about to be an author. They do not satisfy that. And these kind of disagreements are called authorship misconducts. Okay. So what are the possible reasons for authorship disputes? The dispute could be over a person's contribution. How much was the contribution, whether it was substantial or medium or less, etc. And then what should be the order of the author list? And then who should be the first author? I told you why people like to be the first authors. Okay. So who should be the first author and or the corresponding author? And the misconducts would come up with unethical authorship lists. That means there are people who are included who have, like as I said, the ghost authors, okay, gift authors, etc., and or the forged authors. So that's an unethical way to do that. Then again, when some problems occur, people are unwilling to take the responsibility for the problems and try to pass on this accountability to others. So this is where the problems, real problems come up. Then there could be an issue with the number of authors also. Okay. But if you see in the field of, in certain fields like nuclear sciences, nuclear physics, there's a record number of authors at 5,154. This is because of large groups participating in this huge, experiments involving huge facilities like Atlas or CMS. So you have a large number of people who have some role to play in the whole activity. So this was one such article which appeared in 2015 at 5,154. This was at that time the largest number of contributors to a single research article. In fact, the first 9 pages is the actual manuscript, and the rest 24 pages is just the author list. So you can see it is something goes like this. Now, when you have such a huge number of authors, how will you decide who should be the first author? So here, of course, they took a very smart way out. They have simply laid down the condition that author list would be alphabetical order. So this is an alphabetically arranged author list. Okay. Once I believe there was a case where there was a dispute who should be the first author. Then the head of the group said, okay, fine, let us put it in alphabetical order. But he was a very smart man because he knew that in whichever way you put it, his name will come first. Okay. So this is one way of putting down author lists where you do it in alphabetical order. So now what can the journals do in such situations? See, the scope has laid down certain signs. When a manuscript lands up on the editor's table, when it's taken up by the editor, see, these editors of journals are usually highly experienced people. The moment they have a glance at the manuscript and look at the author list, etc., they have that sixth sense. They can sense that if something is wrong, they can somehow sense that something is not proper. And what are the signs which indicate these authorship problems? First, you have this language quality in the manuscript. It does not match the covering letter. Whenever you send a manuscript to any journal, you must enclose what is called a covering letter, mentioning that what is that manuscript about, etc., who are the authors, and all those things one has to mention in the covering letter, and then put the manuscript along with that and send it. So you find that the language used in the covering letter is different from the rest of the manuscript. Another sign is that the corresponding author is unable to respond to reviewers' comments. So a manuscript has been reviewed and the comments have been sent to the corresponding author, but then he seems to be unable to respond to these comments. So that also gives an indication that something is going wrong. Or it's possible that the manuscript was drafted or revised by someone who's not on the author list or not even acknowledged, like a ghost author. Okay. Then that tracking in the manuscript shows that the authors have been added or removed during the process of the after submission process. Okay. Then suddenly you find that there's a very, very prolific author. Okay. So why is it that this name always appears and in any paper emanating from that lab on any field or subfield, various topics, all the time a particular person's name keeps appearing and he gets credit for all the manuscripts. So why is it that? In this regard, some time ago, there was a comment which was published in the journal Nature, where they made an analysis and found out who are the most prolific authors. And they found that there are people who publish more than 70 to 80 papers per year, which makes it almost like this. They bring out a paper every 5 days. Okay. And they did some more research on this why, how, and they found that 1/3 of 81 authors were identified as hyperprolific, 16, and they replied when asked how often they met the 4 criteria established by ACMJE. Out of 27 responders, 19 admitted that they had not met at least one criteria for authorship, more than 25% of the time. And 11 wrote that they had not met 2 or more criteria, upwards of 25% of the time. So you can see how these prolific authors can come about. Then you have authorship changes without notification during revision stages. Then several similar articles have been published under different author names or aliases. And then they show that a similarity check, like a plagiarism check, shows that the work was derived from a thesis where the original author, that means the person who wrote the thesis, is not on the author list or even acknowledged. Then sometimes the contributors, what roles they have, are they genuine roles or not? Uh, that is a issue sometimes. And then, as I said, unfeasibly long or very short author list, which is not commemorate with the text of the manuscript, and unspecified roles in the acknowledgement. You see, at the end of every paper, sometimes you have what are called acknowledgements. Okay, so how does this acknowledgement look like? It looks like something like this. You write that, see, if your research work has been supported by some funding agency, you have to give credit. Okay, and then if you have discussed certain issues with some people, you have to mention that. So here it says that this work has been supported by the National Science Foundation grant so and so, and authors would like to thank so and so along with so and so for useful discussions and inputs during production of this work. So there are some certain reasons given here, or help with some particular measurements. Something has to be given. You cannot say that I thanked ABC. So what for are you thanking? That you don't mention it here. So that gives again a suspicion that what is the role of that person. Okay. And and sometimes the names on the author list are known to be from totally unrelated research areas. And then there could be an industry funded study with no authors from that industry itself. So all these are pointers, okay? They are only pointers. I am not saying that they are the reasons, okay? They are pointers to the fact that there could be issues with the authorship roles. So the journals first have to set what are called standards for authorships. First standard is what I talked about, the ICMJ criteria. Now this has actually undergone a lot of revisions. We have another criteria called the McNutt's criteria, where each author is expected to have made substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. So you see there are certain or and ands which have been put in here as compared to the earlier ones. So some change in the criteria has been suggested. And so such standards have to be put in for the authorship. Then what should be the corresponding author's responsibilities? Okay. So the corresponding authors, they must ensure that all the listed authors in the author list, they have actually approved the manuscript before submission, and that all authors receive the submission and all substantive correspondence with the editors, as well as the full reviews. Nowadays, this is ensured by automatically sending these reviews and correspondence to all the authors by the journal. And the corresponding author should be responsible for managing these requirements across the author group and ensure that the entire author group is fully aware of and in compliance with the best practices in the discipline of publication. And then many journals, they ask the corresponding authors to indicate whether any authors on the earlier versions of the manuscript have been removed or whether any new authors have been added. And if they have been added or removed, why have they been removed? Why have they been added? So that everything has to be given because these are the areas where the misconduct actually creeps in. And these are, of course, I have told you the definitions of different kinds of authorship: ghost, gift, orphan, and forged authorships. Then there is something called use of contributor roles taxonomic credit. Okay. So what does this mean? This means you have to assign give in the end of the manuscript what each author of that manuscript has actually done and how he has contributed to the manuscript. Okay. So the journals should commit to use and where appropriate extend this credit taxonomy as the best currently available method for embedding this author's contribution in the metadata. I'll show you what it means in a little while. So this is a sample credit author statement. For example, this is the one of the authors. He has done conceptualization, methodology, and software. Another author has taken care of data curation, writing, original draft preparation. Another person does visualization and investigation. Another person is supervision. Another person does software and validation. And another person does writing, reviewing, and editing. So this is what is called a credit taxonomy statement. So this is what now many of the journals are insisting that you must put at the end of the manuscript, so that the role and contribution of each author is included in the manuscript. Then there is something called ORCID ID. Many of you may already know about it. It's a identifier. So Open Researcher and Contributor ID. Okay, that's called ORCID ID. This is something like your PAN number, income tax PAN number. Nowadays, you know that once you give the PAN number, all your bank accounts, everything will get linked up, and automatically the income tax department comes to know where how much money has been put, etc. Okay. Similarly, here, what happens is that once an ORCID ID is there against a particular author, all the record about his other submissions, publications, etc., is available through that ORCID ID. So they should, all the journals should require that authors must have an ORCID ID and include it in the metadata. So this is something what it looks like. There's a green dot here against these two authors. So that when you click on that, you can actually get a unique number like a fingerprint or a PAN number, for example. It gives you a unique number which is assigned to each individual, and that is called an ORCID ID. Okay, so this credit taxonomy is comprises certain heads starting from conceptualization, methodology, software, validation, analysis, investigation, blah, 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 writing, original draft, then review and editing, visualization, project administration, funding acquisition. So all these are different heads under the authors might have been involved with. Okay. So each of them, like conceptualization means what are ideas, formulation and evolution of overarching research goals and aims, etc. And investigation, conducting a research and investigation process, specifically performing the experiments connected with that manuscript or data collection, evidence collection, etc. Okay. So, like for example, if one particular author has done this, so against his name, it will be written investigation. Okay. That means he has performed this kind of activity in that manuscript. Writing like that, preparation and creation of presentation of published work, and specifically writing the initial draft, okay, and the translations, etc. So this is what is called a credit taxonomy. And again, you can see another credit taxonomy here. author contributions. This appears at the end of the text of the whole entire manuscript. So you can see here, they are all initials of this author list here. SG and DB conceived the idea and designed the experiments. SG prepared the samples and characterized them. Then SGDB wrote proposals, carried out experiments at synchrotron facilities. BG carried out laboratory X-ray diffraction. SDK, VS, etc., carried out order neutron diffraction experiments, and so on. And then also it's written all the authors discussed and contributed in writing the paper. So this gives an overall picture about what each of this list of authors has done in this particular research activity. Okay, now we deal with what are called the authorship misconduct case histories. And by going through these case histories, I can tell you that you would not have imagined certain things could happen at all in this authorship issues. And most of these problems basically come out of misplaced egos. They come because there is lack of trust between the authors or groups or collaborators. So they are all basically human issues. And all these problems arise because of human qualities. So in the first case, we saw an author affiliated with some institution R publish two papers as a single author, one of them in some journal A. And after publication, this journal or publisher A was contacted by the research integrity officer of that institution with which he was affiliated with a letter of concern which stated that the research institution has conducted a formal investigation and concluded the author failed to acknowledge fully the likely contributions made by other staff and students in his research group, even though his work was heavily influenced by the ideas, experimental results of other members of the staff in the research group. And the formal investigation panel agreed unanimously that the author had behaved unprofessionally and upheld the finding that the research misconduct has taken place regarding the submission and subsequent publication of a single author paper in the journal. So this smart guy, what he did, he took the results and uh, data from his colleagues, where his colleagues had also participated, and he did not include any of their names in the author list and published under his single name. So then the research institute, you see, most of the author disputes, the journals cannot really do much except that they again go back to the institution where the author comes from or the other co-authors, etc., and ask them to resolve the case and get back to them. So the research institution here, they said they had not been able to reach an agreement with the author about the situation and asked the publisher to publish an erratum, which they have worded some erratum, and that you please publish this erratum. Then the journal contacted the author, and that fellow he does not agree with that publishing of that erratum. Instead, he says that no, 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 I will give another erratum. You publish this one. But that was not acceptable to the institute. So what do you do? Okay. So here the COPE forum stepped in and agreed that the institution needs to resolve the issue with the authors. Editors cannot adjudicate in this situation, but they can ensure that the publication record is up to date and correct. So the forum advised publishing an expression of concern until consensus is reached by the institution and the authors. And in this expression of concern, the editor can describe the findings of the institution and objections from the author. And so the authorship and contributorship disputes cannot be really resolved by the editors. They are not judges, okay? And so basically the institutions have to resolve this problem. Another option which the forum suggested is that you can at least threaten that the article would be retracted if no agreement is reached between the institution and the authors. So that was a real threat. And they said if you don't reach an agreement within this time limit, the journal will retract the article. Okay. and they wrote to the author announcing the decision to publish an expression of concern. Then, of course, the author immediately sat up and then he promptly agreed, saying that, okay, no, don't do anything, fine, it's fine. Whatever my formal institution has suggested, it's fine with me. You please go ahead and publish that erratum. Okay. So, which now has been published, and so now the case is almost closed because the erratum is there, and that sort of takes care of the mistake which the author has done. But then again, you see how much time would have got wasted in doing all this. The time of the editor, time of the journal, time of the institution, etc. The next case is that there was a journal which received request for multiple changes to the authorship list after the manuscript was accepted. Now you see the funny part. Till the manuscript was accepted, nobody raised any questions. But after it was accepted, someone from the corresponding author or whoever, he requested for multiple changes to the authorship list. And what was these changes? Originally, there were 5 co-authors. And after the acceptance, request was received from some author A, the corresponding author, and some co-first author. And what was the request? You remove one of the co-authors, some person say D, and add a new co-author E, and reorder the list of authors and change designated co-first author. I mean, this was something which was totally, uh, in a way, unethical. Because why should you suddenly say that you remove one of the authors and add another author? So the publisher explained that before processing any authorship changes, after the article is accepted, consent of all the authors is required. And what happened in this case, all authors except that person D, they responded promptly, saying that they accept the changes. But the response from D was somewhat suspicious. And what was the problem? It came from some unfamiliar email address. And this was different from what was provided when the manuscript was submitted. And the text of the message, it matched verbatim with that response from the author A. So then the publisher or the editor immediately realized there's some golmaal here. And they quickly replied to author D, asking if they would reiterate their consent to the proposed changes, preferably via an institutional address. And this person D never responded, even after sending up a follow-up message. So now let's see what happened. So author A was going on insisting on changes, but then finally realized that nothing is going to happen and said that to avoid further delays, publisher could proceed with the publication using the current author list. And the article was published. After publication, again the author A contacts the journal saying that there was a misunderstanding and they still wanted at least author E to be added. Okay. Then the publisher reiterated that the consent from that original author D is still outstanding and nothing can be done till he gets a response from that author D. Once the journal editor told this A corresponding person this fact, he suddenly receives a follow-up email stating that they agreed to be removed as, I mean, that person D agrees to be removed as co-author. And this email was even more suspicious because this was a third non-institutional email address and the spelling of the author is different. And the spelling of the surname in the body of the third email did not match with the earlier email addresses. So what was happening is the editor suspects that the corresponding author forged both of these author D's responded. So nothing really happened and they kept the article as it is. So again, you see, it's basically human nature and human disagreements which result in all these things. And this case, sorry, I had, yeah, sorry, this I have already done. The number three case is that there was a manuscript submitted to journal, and one of the authors was indicated as the corresponding author. And during the entire process, submission, review, revision, etc., copy editing, proofreading, corresponding author responded to all the emails and signed the publishing agreements, and it was available. Then at that time, the authors of the manuscript did not mention a possible change of corresponding author. The manuscript was published online first. Nowadays, manuscripts, once they are accepted, they are published online first before they come up in print. Okay. And they are assigned what is called a DOI number. That's a digital object identifier number, which is unique to every manuscript. Okay. So after 5 months, of publishing online, the authors of the manuscript asked the journal to change the corresponding author, but without any clear explanation. Okay. So then the journal again sent an email to all the authors and asked why the corresponding author needs to be changed. Only one response was there, the same fellow who asked for change of corresponding author. So they said that during the submission process, they had indicated that the corresponding author should be another person from the list of co-authors. But then when they checked the record, there was no such request coming from them. Then again, they said that fellow says that during the proofreading process, they did not notice the corresponding author was incorrect. That is why they contacted. And then they stated that changing corresponding author was not very important. The request could be ignored. So finally, you see that someone who is unethical has been trying his best to do something unethical. Okay, and once they find that they are unable to get their way through, they'll again say that okay, fine, let the status quo be maintained, let it go as it is. Okay. So in fact, since this request seemed to be confused and unclear, the board decided not to change the corresponding author. Then the next case, there was a manuscript which was submitted, and after the due review and revision process, it was accepted for publication. But then, and during the revision process, the corresponding author was in contact, answered all the emails and performed the revisions, etc., and up to the final stage. And then, when the manuscript was finally accepted for publication, the corresponding author was asked to review the final revision of the manuscript. At this point, that fellow stopped answering any emails. And the journal tried to contact the author several times without any luck. They tried to contact the co-authors and the university also, the department from which they have published, sent the manuscript, but no response was received. So here you find a manuscript which is ready for publishing, going through the entire process, review process, everything, but for the final review or the final revision, everything was done. But then none of the people have started corresponding. I mean, replying. So what can the journal do here? So then the co-forum advised, don't publish this paper if you do not get the final consent from the authors. Okay, because once if they proceed without the final consent, and if there are certain issues which come after publication, then again the authors have to be contacted, and no one has the access to the raw data also in the manuscript, so it's impossible. That is why authorship implies responsibility for the research presented in the paper. You have to own the research. Okay. And if you don't respond, then nobody is taking responsibility for that work, so it cannot be published. Okay. So finally, the journal received no response and decided to withdraw the manuscript. It is so sad. Again, you have a manuscript that has been accepted, going through so many rounds, time, etc., and everyone's time and effort has been wasted here. Now you can see an author submitted a manuscript and stated that he was his sole author. And of course, they got a favorable peer review and was accepted for publication. It was published. After it was published, another person told the author to contact the journal to correct the author list. Okay. So the author of record, he did this and supplied co-author names to the journal. The editor worked with the author group to determine the source of the error and tried to resolve the list and order of authors. Then this author of record, that means corresponding author, acknowledged that he should have credited additional authors. All authors agreed with the corrected list, but the main guy, sole author, insisted on being the first author, and the other guys did not agree for this. So then the editor contacts the university of this person for assistance and found that the person actually has left and he is resident of another country. And the university was unable to assist in resolving this authorship issue. Then the guy contacts the journal and states that due to disagreement on the order of authorship, he was requesting the retraction of the article. So again, the editor made another attempt to resolve the dispute, but for that first author, the sole author, refused to acknowledge any other lead author except himself. And then he agreed that, okay, fine, you retract, and then we'll resubmit the manuscript with another lead author. But then the problem was it was not possible, and the forum agreed that the editor followed the correct route in terms of handling this case, and publishers or editors cannot resolve these authorship disputes. So what happened? The journal chose to republish the article with a corrected author list and a corrigendum. And the corrected article again now has been published online and will later appear as a print of the journal, print issue of the journal. In this case, yeah, there was another interesting case here. Uh, so during the review process itself, the reviewer of the manuscript said that told the editor that the manuscript appeared to be the work of a collaborator of his, whose name is X, and that person was not listed as an author on this paper. And it became clear that the manuscript's corresponding author, some Y, was a postdoc supervised by this person X, previously at some other university, and who has now changed to another university. And a third researcher, Z, who was an author on the manuscript and at an institution in a different country. So the editor asked this person X whether they were aware that this manuscript from their postdoc has been sent to them. So this X said that he is not aware, and he also states that this person Y was actually funded solely from his grant, and that they were working on a similar manuscript for submission elsewhere. And then therefore he requested that the paper may be withdrawn. So then again the editor go back to this Y to confirm whether the author list was complete and otherwise provide us with the funding details. Then this person, very smart, he replies that there are no other authors and the work was completely self-funded. So now the journal contacted the author's institution. Then it turns out that the supervisor X is in the process of moving to a new institution, but still at the same institution as the first author. The chair of the department said that they will look into the matter, and the journal tells Y that they have contacted the institution, and then this person Y says, you please withdraw the paper. Okay. But of course, the journal withdrew the paper as requested by this person Y, but then the institution and the author's postdoc advisor was made known that the paper had been withdrawn. So now the institution is carrying on their investigation. So finally, what happened? As Dr. X stated, they were working on a similar manuscript for submission elsewhere. Withdrawal of the article seems a reasonable response by the journal. Paper was withdrawn, and the editor contacted the institution and asked them to conduct their own investigation. So you have this kind of, again, because of human issues and disputes among people. Okay, people try to do smart things, and they do not give the credit where it is due. which I've been telling you in the previous lectures several times. Try to give credit where it is due. Okay. Otherwise, you'll run into problems. Then this is a single blind peer review process where the reviewer gave an author detailed suggestions. See here what has happened was uh, the peer review process where the author is not supposed to know who is the reviewer. Okay. But then what happened was the reviewer, he gave the author a detailed suggestion on improving some analysis in the manuscript. This is actually unethical on part of, in principle, unethical on part of the reviewer. Reviewer cannot contact the author directly. Okay. And the author was asked to revise and resubmit the paper to address these and other reviewer suggestions. And the author actually, see what the reviewer did was he when he sent this message to the author, he didn't send it as a reviewer. Okay. So the author was unaware of the identity of this reviewer. Okay. And he even approached them in a conference and then discussed this manuscript review. The reviewer actually disclosed the identity that he was one of the reviewers of the manuscript. So then, of course, they discussed how to improve the manuscript, etc., etc., and the reviewer offered certain changes, etc. And he also agreed to become a co-author. And then, before proceeding, the reviewer disclosed this interaction and intention to the journal editors handling the paper. So, what was the mistake done here? Before the reviewer contacted the author, the reviewer should have actually contacted the editor of the journal, probably mentioned to them that the person was known to the reviewer. And in such a situation, in fact, you should not review such manuscripts. You should recuse yourself actually. Yeah. So ideally, the reviewer should have contacted the journal to discuss the situation. So it seems a hard, but then the reviewer, the editor felt it was a hard decision to reject the article because of this inadvertent scientific interaction. But sometimes it's very difficult to say whether this scientific interaction was inadvertent or intentional, that God only knows. If the reviewer had contacted journal, he could have recused themselves from the review process and an independent reviewer could have been easily invited to review the paper. So the editors wrote back to the authors to offer the opportunity to resubmit with the involved reviewer now as a co-author, after which it will receive an independent review. But by the time this happened, the authors have sent this manuscript elsewhere to some other journal. Again, you see the amount of time which has been wasted for the journal. Okay, then we come to another case where the journal was contacted with a claim to first authorship of a paper, which was already published online. The print publication was not yet released, it was published online. So the moment this claim for first authorship came up, the print was put on hold pending the investigation. So what was this claim for first authorship based on? It was based on a claimant stating that he or she had obtained most of the results in the paper during the PhD studies under the supervision of the corresponding author and contributed to the writing of the text. And they also provided evidence of this in the form of screenshots, etc., etc., and rejection of from another journal for a manuscript with a similar title and all those things. So here the corresponding author was contacted and declared on behalf of all authors the claimant had not contributed to the experiments or writing and none of the results shown in the article were performed by the claimant, and they explained that the claimant was discharged from the PhD program before the successful completion. And then the claimant indicated that he or she wanted to dispute this and the institution was asked to investigate and resolve. Because the editor cannot go into this issue at this point. Then the institution has a funny reply. They informed the journal that the knowledge generated during state-funded projects was the property of the institution, and only the institution has the ability to agree a copyright transfer in agreement with the corresponding author. and the corresponding author had full and legal institutional support to determine the author list, etc. And they stated the graduate student may or may not be included as an author on papers deriving from projects. See, these are certain rules which are independent to a certain institution. The institution may lay down these rules that look, all the projects which for which funding comes from them, uh, they'll be all the rules will be determined by them because they are giving the money. So it is dangerous to become students in such places, okay? Because you may not have any rights. So in order to include as an author, a student must first successfully complete their studies within a defined time frame. And then, of course, the institution does not comment on the extent of contribution of the claimant to the research results, etc. So then, Scope Forum advised the journal approached the highest authority within the university to specifically confirm that the authorship was determined according to the criteria set by uh, the ICMJE and COPE, which they found that they actually satisfied all the criteria. So then after that, no further action was taken. So these problems can arise from students also sometimes who are disgruntled or who are left in middle and they try to put certain claims which are not correct. In this case, there was a person who stated her postdoctoral training under a fellowship. She worked until certain time when the fellowship ended. She did all the work herself, gave 2 seminars, etc., etc. And by the time she finished, she had written a manuscript solely on her work and went through several editing rounds with the senior scientists. There were 5 co-authors on the paper, and the supervisor, 2 senior scientists, and a graduate student. So a manuscript was sent to the supervisor who had a remark, etc., with the understanding that he would submit it. But then this uh, person, the supervisor, never received any reply. And I mean, this postdoc never received any reply from the supervisor. And presently, the person has been hired in a permanent research position, which requires that she has to publish at least one paper, and that is hanging in balance. So the forum concluded that that person X should submit the paper for publication, and when they submit the paper to a journal, she should be transparent about the provenance of the paper. What do you mean by provenance of the paper? All the back history of that paper. Okay. So the supervisor's contribution, conflict of interest should also be documented, and if published, the editor consider having a statement concerning view on the paper. Now the problem was the researcher tried to determine the correct person to contact uh, about the supervisor, but then she was unable to do that. So sometimes this also happens. When the university closes ranks, they cannot do much. Another case where the journal published a paper which is now under investigation by the host institution itself for misconduct. Okay. All the authors signed that they agreed authorship and took responsibility for the content of the paper. But then after investigation started, so movement, they say there was some problem in that, some research misconduct which happened in that particular activity. And now suddenly once the investigation started, one of the authors wrote to the journal saying that you please remove my name from the authorship. You know what happened here? This fellow who had his name in the paper, if the investigation had not come about, no one would have said anything. And this fellow also would still be an author. But the moment the investigation started, this fellow said that you please remove my name. Okay. So he knew that there was a problem there. So now should the journal permit the author to withdraw, or does the agreement authorship have irrevocable responsibility? So the forum agreed that the best course of action is to postpone any decision until the investigation by the host institution is over. And in the meantime, they could consider publishing an expression of concern stating that the investigation on the paper is being conducted uh, and the journal should await the outcome of the institution before making any changes to the paper. And then are all authors from the same institution? They may have a legitimate reason. Someone may have a legitimate reason for wanting to be removed if he is from a different institution. Okay. So suggestion was that editor should ask the author why he wishes to be removed from the article. Okay. Then they found that uh, all the authors, including this fellow, have signed the agreement in good faith, and signature was also correct. So the author signed and consented to the publication, and he was responsible. So the presenter of the case, that means the person who was investigating for the journal, confirmed that the author signed the agreement and signature was true and consented to publication. So the editor decides not to allow removal of author following the investigation. He could give the dissenting author the option of publishing a comment on the published paper. So it is up to that fellow now. Okay, now we move on to another topic. Can anyone tell me how much time I have? Oh, okay, fine. I'll try to finish it. I'll take another 5-10 minutes more. Complaints and appeals. Okay. See, complaints can arise over conduct of editors or peer reviewers, and they are breaches of confidentiality or conflict of interest or misuse of privileged information. They can also arise from disputes about substantive decisions like retractions, and there could be administrative issues, that is irregularities in editorial process or the complaints that the journal staff are not replying to the emails. So journals must develop certain guidelines for responding to suspected ethical breaches. Now, what are the causes for this? Typical causes for complaint and appeals? See, peer review by external referees with proper expertise is the most common method to ensure the quality. That means whenever you submit a manuscript, it is expected that it will be reviewed by external referees who are proper experts in that area of research. But this is where problems creep in. See, before even that happens, editors can actually reject the manuscript without any peer review to make best use of their research. They may feel that the manuscript is not fit for their journal or outside the scope of their journal or doesn't meet the quality standards or limited scientific merit or lacks originality, novelty, etc., 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 and send it back the next day to the author. Very often we find that, especially from our country, when you send manuscripts to the top journals, usually they come back the next day saying that this is not fit for that journal, whatever. Okay. And because of this, authors feel very aggrieved that the manuscripts have not been given a chance to be sent to an expert or a review. And some guy in the editorial office who may not be an expert at all might have decided to simply reject the manuscript and send it back without sending it to a review. Okay. So to handle these disputes, journals must have a contact person for these inquiries, and they should focus on promptly correcting the literature and request these authors, institutions, or employers to investigate and follow up on author misconduct and discipline. Then they must also have a process for author appeals against editorial decisions. Yeah. And they also must have processes to investigate and manage this editor, reviewer, or staff misconduct, which may happen. And when needed, is contact other journals or other institutions and seek independent and legal advice. See, most of the problems come with authors appealing against editorial decisions. And the issue is that despite the editor's best efforts to solicit fair and unbiased reviews, authors may still want that they would like to challenge the reviewer's decision, reviewer's comments, etc., and ask the editor to send it to another reviewer and things like that. So this is a very difficult thing actually. So the editor has to decide whether the author is correct or whether the reviewer is correct, and then take a decision based on that. And but to do all this, they must have some policy in place actually. Okay. And they should also determine whether this particular decision taken by the editor was explained to the author properly, and uh, and it might have been based on wrong or other questionable information. So incorrect reading of the manuscript or bad advice from a reviewer. So this decision has to be taken by the editor. And then finally, reconsider rejected manuscript if the author provides proper reasons why that decision which was made was wrong. And you should be willing to revise the manuscript in response to the valid comments of the reviewers. So many journals allow the author to write what is called a rebuttal letter, explaining why their manuscript should be reevaluated. And so the editors must, of course, encourage resubmission of manuscripts which are potentially good, acceptable, and were rejected either because of some major revision or some little bit of extra data was required, and which could have made that manuscript more acceptable and things like that. Okay. So different publishers have different policies on this complaints and appeals. So, for example, Springer series of journals, they have certain appeal systems and complaint protocols. So, like the editor-in-chief considers the author's argument and the reviewer reports, and then takes a decision whether the decision to reject should stand or another independent review should be taken, and whether this appeal should be considered at all. And then the complainant is informed of the decision with an explanation if appropriate. Okay. And then the decisions made here are final, and then the new submission take priority over appeals. And then time taken for review complaints. So that also is an issue sometimes. Okay. So that again, the editor-in-chief has to take action on this. Then about publication ethics and the researchers' conduct or the authors or reviewers' conduct. Again, here they have to involve themselves and then find out who is correct and who is wrong, and try to decide on a course of action and give feedback to the complainant. Okay, and sometimes if the complainant still is not satisfied, he can jack up the complaint to a higher level also. Then the APS journal, that American Physical Society journal, they have another set of appeal procedures, and they are all available at the respective journal society websites or the journal websites themselves, how the review process takes place and how the complaint and appeal process takes place for each journal. They'll be different for different journals. Okay. And so this is one set which follows for the APS journal. Okay. So the author of a paper that has been rejected uh, subsequent to an editorial board review may request that the case be reviewed by the editor-in-chief of the APS, the very top guy. Okay. And that also, of course, it will be a final decision, and it may or may not work out. And then RSC journals, which are mostly related Royal Society of Chemistry journals, they have another process for appeals, how you can do this appeal, like sending a rebuttal letter to the editor and then explaining clearly why you disagree with the decision and detailed response to the comments, etc. And then the editor will consider your appeal, and then they are all handled on a case by case basis. Okay, and the decision is final. So if the appeal is granted, the university will go, the manuscript will go ahead for further assessment by an independent reviewer. Okay. Then there's sometimes a case of a plagiarism complaint. So some author X published in a journal explained to the editor that his paper has been plagiarized by a paper that has been published by another journal. And the authors of the paper in journal B did not respond to the letter sent by this first author asking for an explanation. So here the editor of journal A compared the two papers and confirmed the plagiarism. But then the editor contacts the other journal, editor of the other journal, but then no response was received here. So it was very clear case of plagiarism. So editor of this journal A contacts the editor of journal B, but there is no response. and then no more successful were the attempts made by representative of the publishing house of the journal A to contact any representative of the journal B. So here what was clear is that this journal B is a suspect journal. Probably it is a predatory journal which has agreed to publish any sort of paper, whether it is plagiarized or not. And if such a journal will never reply to the other editor. Okay, this second journal editor will simply keep quiet, because there are instances where unscrupulous journals do not respond to these requests, and then the forum would advise the journal A to post a note on the paper, and it should also clarify which of the papers plagiarized, and it should be worded in neutral terms. And but of course, this author is not going to be satisfied with just a note. He wants the paper to be removed from that B journal, other journal. But then the only way that can happen is if the journal A is interested and holds the copyright, then if they're interested, they can take a legal action, which very rarely happens. Finally, there's an advice given by Nature Journal how not to appeal. Okay, you can appeal to your heart's content, but then you must first try to find out whether it is worth doing it. So the moment you face a rejection, it is always better to spend some time why it was rejected, etc., before immediately jumping to making an appeal for reconsideration. Okay. So discussion with co-authors on the pros and cons of the issues as well as the other format of the appeal will help. And if the reviewer wants some new data, then that has to be taken and then provided. So then if you find that the scientific grounds are really strong, if you feel that scientifically you are on a very strong foundation, then of course you can write a measured, scientifically sound response, offering to clear the misconception, the process. And lastly, do not try to throw your weight around, because it will not make any difference to the outcome even if you are a Nobel Prize winner. Okay, thank you at this point, and please let me know in case any of you have any questions to ask. I'm sorry it took a little extra time, but I couldn't help it. Any questions, please? You can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Any questions on the YouTube side? I don't see at least any questions here in the chat box.
No questions, sir, on YouTube till now.
On YouTube also?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So thank you. And if you still have any questions later, you can email your queries to me and I can answer your questions. Thank you very much.
No class.
Yeah, there is no class. Again, a reminder is there. There's no class on 22nd. The next lecture will be on 24th March.
Thank you. Okay, sir.
Thank you.